So Mike Leach is about 48 hours away from his first game as a head coach in the Southeastern Conference. How does his offense translate to the personnel that Mississippi State has?
I think it could end up being a little bit better than people believe. I don't know if they're going to be 50, 75 yards a game better than they were last year. Maybe from a passing perspective, they will. But, yeah, I think Osiris Mitchell has the making of being a legitimate number one receiver in this league. I think when you take Kylan Hill and look at what he's going to be able to do, not only being handed the football, but catching the football, he becomes extremely dangerous because I think he's the best running back in the SEC, and I think he's one of the most dynamic players in the open field in all of college football. And you go back and look at some of the numbers from last year. Max Borghi in that Washington State system last year, I think he caught 83 balls in that offense last year. So the people who kind of said, this Kylan Hill thing, it's not a good fit, it's not going to happen, how's he going to get the football? He's still going to get his touches. Now, that's going to happen. So they got a big physical offensive line. Now, it's a new technique, new fundamentals. It'll be a little bit different from them, but you don't have to hold your blocks as long. That ball should be getting out. So I think it's got a chance to be pretty good. You got a veteran quarterback, KJ Costello, that's had success against legitimate Power 5 opponents. So, but it's all about timing. It's all about rhythm, continuity, chemistry, feel. And I don't know if they've had enough reps for that to really be have them close to be clicking on all cylinders just yet.
All right, Cole, that's enough about the pretty boys on the outside. Let's get to the nitty-gritty of the positions that matter. Let's talk some offensive line play. We've been talking about it all week. The splits, we all know how unique they are to Mike Leach and his offense, and I've got questions about that, but I want to start off with something you kind of mentioned, right? It's a new technique. It's new learning for this offensive line. How difficult is that? You've played one way kind of your whole life. You've run block one way. You've pass set. You've had a guard next to you. If you're a tackle, if you're the center, you've had protection on the outside with your guards. You don't have that anymore. I mean, this is a true one-on-one, you're on an island type system. How much of a transition is that for Mississippi State's linemen?
I think it could be a big transition. And keep in mind, this isn't a group that, regardless of how long they've been there and who their coach was, they hadn't taken 50, 60, 70 pass sets a game, first off. It's just not something that they've done. The most uncomfortable part about this for them, Jacob, and I'm just being honest, and when you know how some of the intricate things in football can really affect you, is going to be getting in that pass stance before the snap and having to hold it for a few seconds, maybe 65, 70 times. That doesn't feel good. You get in a 3-point stance, you can rock your weight a little bit. You can take a little bit off the legs, and it's a little bit easier. You go out there in your front yard right now and get in a 3-point stance. Tell me how long you can sit there, and then get in a 2-point stance, bent halfway down, where your quads are parallel to the ground. How long are you going to be able to stay in that? The 3-point stance is going to be a lot easier. So they're not going to do a bunch of that. And I think one thing for LSU fans to watch will just be some of those offensive linemen from Mississippi State, middle of the third, early fourth quarter. Do their legs look dead? Do they look tired? You seeing guys standing straight up early in plays, or is it taking them a long time to get down in their stance before the ball snaps? Those are the things that I would look for to say, yeah, these guys aren't used to this. Their bodies aren't conditioned to go out and do this the way that they have been. So I think that's one part of it. The other part is you'll see more vertical pass sets. So they'll take their pass sets pretty much straight back, and it's not going to be a traditional kick step. It's going to be more of a sift where you're just trying to get back as fast as you can, and you're sort of inviting guys to go inside a little bit because if you can take that initial move away, ball's going to be out by the time a defensive lineman redirects. So you don't have the opportunities of getting beat with a second or third move like some other guys do in traditional pass sets.
Obviously, Cole, they do this to try to create an advantage. When Mike Leach was at Texas Tech, Washington State, he didn't feel like he had maybe the Jimmys and Joes to compete, so he came up with this. It gives you angles in the run game, and it also defensive line wise, you can't really do a lot of twists, because if you twist, you're not going to get there because it is so spread out. But I'm just saying, one-on-one with some of the defensive tackles that we have in the SEC, giving them that much space, knowing how quick they can be, and you think of some of the great defensive linemen that are first-round picks in this conference. I'm very curious to how it works out, right? Because Mike Leach has never gone against SEC defensive linemen week in and week out. Do you think this is something that can work for them?
It depends on who's pulling the trigger. If that guy knows that the ball needs to get out quick and his receivers can be on the same page with him, maybe. But I'll say this. I'll flip this around. If this was last year, I'd be 100% on board with you. But look at the interior defensive line talent that's gone from last year in this league, and you got a bunch of big dudes coming back this year, like Quentin Bohanna, Jordan Davis, Joshua Pascal. LeBron Ray is not even a guy that I look at as being real loose on the interior of a defensive line. Last year was the year that this thing could have really gotten busted up because you had an elite defensive lineman, nose guard or three tech. Benito Jones at Ole Miss, McTelvin Agim at Arkansas. You had a guy who was going to be problematic on the interior of a defensive line on every team that you face. We don't even need to get into Derek Brown and Javon Kinlaw and those guys. Raekwon Davis at Alabama. So I think this might be the year to test it out because you don't have a ton of guys on the interior of SEC defensive lines that are really loose, that are quick enough and adept enough, athletic enough to consistently win one-on-ones. You think about a guy like Christian Barmore, he might end up being that guy. We only saw him late last year. Maybe a T.D. Slayton at Florida, Bobby Brown at Texas A&M could sort of turn into that guy. But there's not near as many ones that are proven this year as there were going into last year.
All right, Cole, let's flip the script. Let's go LSU offensive line. This is an offensive line that you know very well, the Joe Moore Award for the nation's best offensive line a year ago. And, yes, you do return some of those guys that helped out that offensive line. Dare Rosenthal at left tackle. You've got Ed Ingram. You've got Austin Deculus, guys that were big players for LSU's national championship run a year ago. When you look at this offensive line, and you do have new starters, but you have more coming back than I think people give them credit for.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think people just look at the departures, and especially the fact that Lloyd Cushenberry had that number 18 patch on last year, and then they think about leadership and communication and things of that nature. It's going to be tough to replace, but there's a lot of guys that have just played a lot of football in there. You throw in Chasson Hines. He's a guy that's been in and played. Ed Ingram. Some people just don't view him as a regular starter, and I don't really know why they don't. That guy had pretty much solidified himself as somebody that was a heavy contributor on that LSU offensive line last year. Obviously, Deculus has played a ton of football. Rosenthal played a lot of football last year with Sadiq Charles being sort of in and out of the lineup, especially early in the season. So you've got experience. You got more experience than anybody else in this league that lost the number of, returning starters, quote fingers, than LSU did. So the big question for me is Eric Gilbert, because you know how I feel about Thaddeus Moss, and you know how I feel about what he did for that football team last year. And you can sit here and tell me about Eric Gilbert running routes and how fast and how sleek and how cool he looks and his catch radius and wingspan. That's fine. You willing to do the dirty work at the line of scrimmage? Because that's what I saw Thaddeus Moss do every week last year. And I think it's an offense that's sort of built to have that attached and be a part of it. One way or the other, they're going to need that other guy that can do some of that dirty work, some of that heavy lifting near the football as a point of attack. So if they can find someone to be able to help with that, I don't view this as a potential weakness for this LSU football team.
Catching up with Cole Cubelic of the SEC Network and Sirius XM here on Hangin with Hester and Hanny. All right, Cole, real quick, conference outlook. Which game are you looking forward to the most this weekend?
Oh, well, you're going to call me a homer. And, I just appreciate first and foremost that you didn't get me on here to talk about the 120th divisional championship or whatever it is that the Braves have won. So I've had to listen to that on my show all week. Even though the Yankees have more world titles than you have divisional titles.
You know how I feel about Jim Leyritz and the Yankees. Don't even bring that up.
But it's Kentucky Auburn, man. I don't think it's the best game in the SEC. I think it's the best game of the weekend in all of college football. This is going to be an old school heavyweight title fight. I think physicality is what will go a long way in determining who wins this football game. You got a big, heavy Kentucky defensive front that's going up against four new starters on that Auburn offensive line. Don't really have a proven tailback. DJ Williams played some last year, but I don't really view him as explosive. So I wonder if he can consistently be the guy on an every down basis for this Auburn football team. Is it going to be a freshman like Tank Bigsby maybe? And then on the flip side of that, Drake Jackson's best center in the SEC. And you have two of the best tackles returning in the SEC, in Darian Kennard and Landon Young. And this group has had that attitude, that mean, that nasty for a couple of years now. John Schlerman does an amazing job with that Kentucky offensive line. And I think people, without a doubt, overlook what Kentucky has behind them. Not just that Terry Wilson won 10 games as a starter 2 years ago, and he's back from injury, but A.J. Rose is a legit downhill tailback in this league. Cavassier Smoke and Chris Rodriguez, both extremely explosive. And I think Josh Ali can be enough on the outside at wide receiver. So I'm not sure it's a great matchup for Auburn week 1. I really don't believe that it is, because I think physically Kentucky can match up. And that's usually in a game like this, where it's Kentucky LSU, Kentucky Alabama, Kentucky Auburn, you're thinking, all right, Auburn's going to dominate the trenches. O-line, D-line, they're going to push them around, and Kentucky's going to have to find a way to sort of manage that. I don't think that's the case, really, on either side of the football. You got a young man in Bo Nix that now has a new system with a new offensive line and didn't have a ton of success downfield last year anyway. He's got to find a way to create explosive plays. And whether that's Schwartz, whether it's Seth Williams, whoever it is, he must create explosive plays. He had more misses than he had completions on throws 10 yards or more in the air last year. 53% of his passing yards, just over 2,500 yards, came from yards after the catch. He's got to find a way to successfully deliver the ball down the field. And is that O-line going to give him enough time to do it? And if Kentucky can go in there and sort of muck that game up, slow it down, make it a bit of a dirty fight, I think they're in it in the fourth quarter. And with a veteran quarterback and a veteran offensive coordinator like Eddie Gran, and Auburn replacing a lot on that defensive line, not to mention 4 guys in the secondary. Nobody talks about that. Everybody focuses in on Derek Brown and Marlon Davidson. But Jeremiah Denson led the team in tackles. Daniel Thomas was second on the team in tackles. Javaris Davis was tied for the team lead in interceptions, and Noah Benogany went in the first round. Those guys are all gone. That's a ton of wherewithal. That's a ton of know-how. That's a ton of awareness that's not going to be there for Kevin Steele's defense. Maybe the best linebacking group in the SEC, but still, it's going to be a very interesting matchup Saturday morning. I'm glad I'm going to be on the call and be there inside Jordan-Hare Stadium, because I think it's the best game of the weekend.
Hanny, it's like Cole and I shared notes before he came on today, because we were aligned with everything that he just said there. That's why we make a great team on Sirius XM when we host together.
I'm looking forward to that game, too. You've just been jamming Kentucky down my throat for 2 months now, so I want to actually see them play first. Cole, we appreciate your time. Have a good call this weekend. We'll look forward to talking with you soon.
Appreciate you guys having me.